The rain poured mercilessly over the streets of Chicago, turning the sidewalks into shimmering rivers of reflected neon lights. Darius Cole sat on a worn-out bench outside a gas station, his hoodie pulled over his head, shielding himself from the cold drizzle. His sneakers, once pristine white, were now scuffed and stained, the soles barely hanging on. The weight of failure sat heavy on his shoulders, pressing down on him like an invisible force. Just a few years ago, he had been a promising college basketball player, lightning-fast reflexes, an unstoppable jump shot, and dreams as high as the rafters of the United Center. But dreams didn't pay bills. And when a knee injury shattered his career, his future crumbled with it. Now, at 32 years old, he had nothing to show for the years he spent chasing greatness. No job, no home, no family to turn to. He had spent the last few months sleeping in shelters or curled up under bridges, holding onto the last shreds of dignity he had left. In his hands, he clutched a crumpled, faded photograph, a picture of him at 12 years old, standing next to a life-sized cardboard cutout of Michael Jordan. His smile in the picture was pure and hopeful, his eyes filled with an unbreakable belief that he would one day stand on the same court as his idol. That boy was long gone. A passing car splashed a puddle onto his legs, soaking his jeans. Darius sighed, rubbing his hands together for warmth. His stomach growled, a painful reminder that he hadn't eaten all day. The few crumpled bills in his pocket weren't enough for anything more than a cheap convenience store sandwich. He looked up at the store window, watching as customers walked in and out, laughing, buying snacks, swiping their cards without a second thought. Money, comfort, normal life. Things he used to take for granted, now completely out of reach. As he stood up, intending to go inside and buy whatever his last dollars could afford, he caught a glimpse of something unreal in the reflection of the glass. A tall figure, unmistakable in stature, wearing a black hoodie and sweatpants, stepping out of a sleek black SUV. The figure's presence alone made people double-take, whisper, nudge each other. Darius turned, his heart skipping a beat. Even in the dim light of the parking lot, there was no mistaking who it was. Michael Jordan. The legend. The icon. The man who had been his childhood hero. Darius swallowed hard. What was he doing here? The universe had just placed him face to face with the very man who inspired his long-lost dream. But what difference did it make now? To Michael Jordan, he was just another nobody, another lost soul in a city full of them. Or so he thought. Darius's breath hitched in his throat. Michael Jordan. Even in the dim glow of the gas station's flickering lights, the man was undeniable. 6 feet 6 inches, broad shoulders, a quiet but commanding presence that made the air feel heavier. The way he walked, unhurried, casual, yet effortlessly dominant, made it clear. He didn't just exist in the world, he owned the space he walked in. Darius swallowed hard, his instinct telling him to look away, to disappear, to not let the greatest basketball player of all time see him like this. A failure. A broken man. But fate had other plans. Michael Jordan stepped inside the gas station, moving with the kind of confidence that didn't need to be loud. He wasn't surrounded by security. No flashy jewelry. No cameras, no entourage, just a man, dressed in a black hoodie and sweats, like any other regular guy. Darius hesitated, his feet frozen to the pavement. He knew he had no reason to go inside. But something in him, something buried beneath years of disappointment and hopelessness, urged him forward. Before he could stop himself, he followed. Inside, the store buzzed with the quiet hum of fluorescent lights and the faint sound of a radio playing an old R&B song. The smell of cheap coffee, gasoline, and microwaved burritos filled the air. Michael stood near the refrigerators, scanning the rows of energy drinks. He reached for one but paused, noticing Darius standing awkwardly a few feet away. For a moment, silence stretched between them. You just gonna stand there and stare, or you gonna say something? Michael's voice was low, calm, with that signature rasp. Darius stiffened, embarrassed. Did he really just get called out by MJ himself? He cleared his throat, forcing himself to speak. I didn't mean to bother you. Just wasn't expecting to see you here. Michael smirked, grabbing a drink and shutting the fridge door. Didn't expect to see myself here either, he said, shrugging. Needed a break. Too much noise uptown. Darius nodded, suddenly aware of his own reflection in the glass door, hollow eyes, sunken cheeks, the weight of years of struggle etched into his face. Standing next to Michael, he felt even smaller, even more out of place. Michael studied him for a second, then casually asked, "You play ball?" Darius felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Of all the questions, it had to be that one. "Used to," he admitted, voice low. "A long time ago." Michael raised an eyebrow. "That's so?" He glanced down at Darius's shoes, battered, barely holding together, but unmistakably an old pair of Air Jordans. Darius saw where his gaze landed and let out a humorless chuckle. "Yeah, guess I didn't plan on running into you while wearing these." Michael took a sip of his drink, his expression unreadable. Looks like they've seen some real games." Darius exhaled, shaking his head. Why was this happening? Why was he having a conversation with Michael Jordan in a gas station at midnight? Something about the way Michael looked at him, it wasn't pity. It wasn't judgment. It was something else. Understanding. "You from around here?" Michael asked. "Born and raised." "You got a name?" "Darius. Darius Cole." Michael nodded, as if committing it to memory. Darius Cole. Sounds like a name that should have been in the league. Darius clenched his jaw, looking away. "Yeah, should have." Michael didn't push. Didn't pry. Just let the silence settle, as if he already knew the rest of the story. The cashier called out, "That all for you, sir?" Michael walked over, placing his drink on the counter. As he pulled out his wallet, he glanced back at Darius. "You hungry?" Darius tensed. He knew where this was going. "I'm good," he lied. Michael's eyes flickered to the crumpled bills in Darius's pocket, the last few dollars he had left. "Yeah," Michael said, unconvinced. He nodded toward the shelves. "Pick whatever you want." "On me." Darius felt his pride tighten in his chest. He hated this feeling, needing help, feeling like a charity case. But his stomach growled again, betraying him. Reluctantly, he grabbed a sandwich and a bottle of water, placing them next to Michael's drink. Michael paid, then handed the bag over. "Eat." Darius hesitated, then took it. "Thanks." Michael simply nodded. Then, as if the moment had already passed, he grabbed his drink and headed for the door. Darius watched him go, something stirring in his chest. Michael Jordan didn't owe him anything. He didn't have to stop, didn't have to notice him, didn't have to see him. But somehow he did. And for the first time in a long time, Darius felt something he thought he'd lost. The night after meeting Michael Jordan, Darius sat in the same spot outside the gas station, staring at the sandwich wrapper in his hands. It had been a simple gesture, a meal, a conversation, but it was the first time in a long time someone had looked at him like he was worth something. Still, he had no illusions. Michael Jordan was a legend, a billionaire. He'd probably already forgotten about the random homeless guy he met at a gas station. Darius sighed and pulled his hoodie tighter against the cold. He needed to figure something out. He couldn't keep living like this. But he had no idea where to start. The next morning, Darius was woken up by the sound of a car pulling up nearby. He rubbed his eyes and sat up, blinking at the sleek black SUV parked just a few feet away. The door opened. Michael Jordan stepped out. Darius's heart nearly stopped. "Man, you're still here?" Michael said, shaking his head. He looked around. "You got somewhere to be." Darius hesitated. "Not really." Michael studied him for a moment, then jerked his head toward the SUV. "Come on." Darius blinked. Did he just invite me into his car? He wanted to say no. Wanted to say it didn't make sense. But something about the way Michael said it, like it wasn't an offer, but a fact, made him get up and step inside. As they drove, Darius sat stiffly, stealing glances at Michael, who looked completely at ease, like this wasn't the most surreal moment of Darius's life. "Where are we going?" Darius finally asked. Michael smirked. "You'll see." The SUV pulled up outside a massive building with floor-to-ceiling windows. Darius recognized it immediately, an exclusive, high-end training facility in downtown Chicago. Michael led him inside, past state-of-the-art courts, private workout rooms, and a lounge filled with trophies and signed jerseys. The air smelled of polished wood and sweat, the sound of bouncing basketballs echoing in the distance. Darius felt completely out of place. "What are we doing here?" he asked, his voice low. Michael stopped near a private office and turned to him. "You said you used to play ball." Darius's throat tightened. "Yeah. Before my knee injury." Michael nodded like he already knew. "And what did you do after that?" Darius let out a bitter laugh. "Nothing. Couldn't play. Didn't have a backup plan. Just lost everything." Michael crossed his arms. "So, what if you had another shot?" Darius frowned. "At what? I can't play anymore." Michael's expression was unreadable. "Who said anything about playing?" Darius froze. Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out a folder, handing it to him. Confused, Darius flipped it open. His breath caught. Inside was a job offer, a position at the very training facility they were standing in. Darius's hands trembled as he scanned the document. It wasn't just any job. It was a coaching opportunity. "Wait," his voice cracked. "I don't understand. What is this?" Michael leaned against the desk, arms crossed. "I made some calls. Told them about you. About what you've been through. They agreed to give you a shot. If you want it." Darius felt like the room was spinning. This wasn't just a job. It was a way back into the world he thought he'd lost forever. "But why?" he whispered. "Why would you do this for me?" Michael's gaze softened. "Because I know what it's like to lose something you love. And I know what it's like to fight your way back." Darius couldn't speak. The weight of years of struggle, of hopeless nights, of feeling invisible, it all came crashing down. He wasn't invisible anymore. Michael Jordan had seen him. And now he had given him a second chance. Darius sat in the dimly lit locker room of the elite training facility, staring at the job offer in his trembling hands. He still couldn't believe it. The second chance. A real shot at rebuilding his life. The door creaked open, and Michael Jordan stepped inside, holding 2 bottles of water. He tossed one to Darius and leaned against the lockers, watching him. "You look like you're about to pass out," Michael chuckled. Darius exhaled shakily. This is just crazy. I don't deserve this, man." Michael tilted his head. "And why not?" Darius swallowed hard. "Because I failed. I had everything and I lost it. My injury wasn't even the worst part, it was what came after. I gave up. I let myself fall apart. Who gives a guy like that a second shot?" Michael was silent for a moment. Then he sighed, crossed his arms, and looked down, like he was remembering something painful. "You know," he said, his voice quieter now, "I know what it's like to lose everything too." Darius frowned. "Michael Jordan? The greatest basketball player of all time?" Michael's gaze darkened. "Before I became the player everyone knows, I was just a kid with a dream. A dream that got crushed." He shook his head. "I got cut from my high school varsity team. The coach said I wasn't good enough." Darius had heard the story before, but hearing Michael say it himself, it felt different. "But the part people don't talk about," Michael continued, "is how much that messed with me. I went home that night and cried. Thought maybe I wasn't meant to play. Maybe the world was right about me." Darius held his breath. But then, Michael leaned forward, his voice firm. "I made a choice. I could let that moment define me, or I could fight back." He tapped his chest. "I chose to fight. I trained harder. Worked like hell. And the next year? I made the team. Then college. Then the NBA. And the rest, well, you know the rest." Darius felt something in his chest tighten. Michael hadn't just given him a job. He had given him a mirror, a reflection of the same struggle, the same pain. "You had your fall, Darius," Michael said. "But that doesn't mean you can't rise again." Darius clenched his jaw. All these years, he had told himself it was over, that he wasn't worth saving. But if Michael Jordan had once been told he wasn't good enough, and still became the greatest, then maybe, just maybe, Darius wasn't finished yet. Tears burned in his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. Michael smirked as if he knew. "You don't have to say anything, man. Just promise me one thing." Darius nodded, barely able to speak. Don't waste this shot. Darius swallowed hard. Then, for the first time in years, he felt something he thought he had lost forever. 1 year later, the morning sun cast golden streaks across the polished hardwood floors of the elite basketball training facility. The sound of bouncing basketballs and sneakers squeaking against the court filled the air, but none of it distracted Darius. He stood at the sidelines, clipboard in hand, watching a group of young players running drills. His eyes followed their movements, not just their technique, but their determination. He could see their hunger, their drive, because he knew that feeling all too well. Darius! He turned as the facility's head coach approached, a wide grin on his face. We need you on court too. One of the kids wants to work on his shooting. Says he wants to learn from the best. Darius let out a small chuckle. The best? He wasn't sure he deserved that title. But he had learned something over the past year. It wasn't about perfection. It was about resilience. He walked over to a scrawny teenager, gripping a basketball with nervous excitement. You want to learn how to shoot? Darius asked. The boy nodded eagerly. Darius took the ball from him, spun it in his hands, then bent his knees and released a perfect shot. Swish. The boy's eyes went wide. Whoa! Darius smiled. A year ago, he had been sleeping on cold pavement, convinced his life was over. But he was coaching, teaching kids how to believe in themselves the way Michael Jordan had believed in him. All right, your turn, Darius said, tossing the ball back to the kid. The boy lined up for his shot. As Darius watched him, a deep sense of gratitude settled in his chest. Michael Jordan had given him more than just a job. He had given him purpose. He glanced across the gym. Near the entrance, a familiar figure stood watching. Michael Jordan, arms crossed, a small smirk on his face. Darius gave him a nod. Michael nodded back. No words were needed. Darius had kept his promise. He hadn't wasted his shot. And now, he was making sure others wouldn't waste theirs. Because sometimes, the smallest act of kindness creates the biggest change.